Hello everyone, and welcome today to the 2 days Culture Now. My name is Akram Zataari, I'm the Executive Director of the ICA. Great to see you all, and so many friendly faces. Today we'll be spending time with Akram Zaatari, who's a filmmaker, photographer, and I had written archival artist, but I think we can challenge that in due course, no doubt. He's one of the founders of the Arab Image Foundation, which tracks down and preserves photos, but more importantly, it's a collecting engine for the culture of preservation. His solo exhibitions in 2013 include On Photography, People and Modern Times, which is presently on at Thomas Dane Gallery and will be on until the 1st of February. On that note, I'd like to thank Martine from Thomas Dane very much for helping with today's organisation and bringing the artist to us. All Is Well was an exhibition that Akram took part in Kingston University, Ontario. Sorry, a solo show. Led to a refusing pilot as Akram showed at the, as part of the Lebanese pavilion in the Venice Biennale, the 55th one. Akram also took part in Project 100 at MoMA in New York. I'd also like to introduce Achim Borchardt-Hume, a good friend, and I'm very, very pleased that you were able to do this today. And I still haven't had a moment to say thank you for coming and doing this. He is currently the head of exhibitions at Tate Modern. At Tate, he's organised shows such as Albers and Maholy-Nagy from the Bauhaus to the New World, and Rothko, the Late series. In 2012, he organised Gerhard Richter's first exhibition in Lebanon at the Beirut Arts Centre. I'd like to thank both Akram and Achim, and on we go. Thank you both. Thank you.
Can you hear me with this? It's always slightly awkward to use those things, but we will try to make it work. So rather than having a straightforward, well, it will be reasonably straightforward conversation, we're not that outrageous, but given that part of how Akram's work works, and I think for those of you who have been to his very, very beautiful exhibition, I have to say, at Thomas Dane Gallery, you will have seen that it works very much by association. Different elements are in play with one another, and so we thought that for the talk, we will do the same thing, for which we've got a set of cards, each of which has a term on it, and from there we go and we'll create a conversation, I hope. So Akram can choose the first one.
Great. It looks like I'm on a TV show, and I've always dreamed of that, but nobody gave me a chance to. Conflict.
It's actually three terms.
You can spell
They all belong together. Okay.
Conflict, contradiction, and ambiguity. Ambiguity is one of, can be, not always, can be one of the nicest things, nicest encounters. When you look at something that you don't understand, that means you delay your understanding of it until a future time. That means you live with it and you live with the questions in it much longer. And I love to produce this with audience. Contradiction is also something that you live with, and it's not necessarily bad. Conflict is something either produced in you when you encounter a situation, or something that's imposed on you, and then you find yourself in it, and you have to cope with it and deal with it. For conflict, the first thing that comes to mind is the Israeli-Lebanese or the Israeli-Palestinian or the Israeli-Arab conflict that I found myself in, and I think part of my work deals with. Contradiction, I'm known to lead very contradicting gestures sometimes. The last one is burying archives as opposed to excavating archives. And I really think there's something similar about things that apparently look contradicting to each other. I really think I think of it the same way. You are an old person, but once you've been a child and you've taken this path between childhood and older age. And very often, as an older person, you do a trip back to childhood. And it's those trips between contradicting, what seems to be contradicting, is that really intricates me. And this is why what I'm saying, we live, I mean, contradiction is not something bad that happens. Sometimes people accuse you in the course of a conversation, oh, you're contradicting yourself. We all do contradict ourselves, and it's so human not to settle on one path and say, okay, I'm really rigid. It's like, I don't believe in ideologies that are too strict. And it's nice to be able to sometimes contradict yourself because you don't know, and you find yourself, yeah. You wanted to,
well, if you accept contradiction as an essential part of the human condition, then do you think you would, thinking about your work, that conflict would be the destructive answer, how to deal with it, and ambiguity could be the creative answer, how to deal with it?
Yes. Yes, but I really don't want to give answers, but it's like we're not in the UN. Once I was in Cyprus maybe 10 years ago, and I was like doing a small research about the Cypriot problem, the division between occupied zone and one scholar told me this amazing thing. He worked a lot on the UN text, trying to bring different positions together. There's a term that they use a lot, is constructive ambiguity. It's like, let's leave texts constructively ambiguous so they could pass, because otherwise, if everything is precisely transcribed in a text, in a contract, then they will not agree on it. So certain things needed to be ambiguous, and they thought from a UN perspective that this is a constructive ambiguity. It should remain in text so they could at least agree on something. I'm not talking about this, but I always kept it like in my mind. I think it's an interesting type of ambiguity.
Let's try to take one more, how that may. Oh, so this one is time, and how your work, I mean again, if you look at the current exhibition, some of the work stays still, it's image arrested. Some of the work works over time, it's what's so currently called time-based media. Time is an important part for the viewer in it, because you will meander through space as you experience it, and you will experience time as you connect one point to the next. So what role plays time in your work?
This great film by Chris Marcus on Soleil, and so many of you have seen it. There's a point when he talks about a tree trunk and how much a tree trunk becomes like a diagram of time, because the trees grow wider and they produce this spiral. So there's this spiral of time that is a record of the time when the tree lived, and he's pointing at the moment outside that trunk, meaning outside time, outside the ability of that tree to record, to register. And it's this element of time that interests me in my work. Many of my works have time in the title, like The End of Time for the video, the 10-minute video I did for Documenta. And I really I'm fascinated by where does time start and where does it end. Not in a scientific or like universal, but really like time as a time frame for chronology or memory. We've always, like, history teaches us that it has a beginning and it has an end, it ends today, but I'm interested in expanding this and what happens outside time. So this is almost like a philosophical interest. Concretely, I work with film and music and video, and these are considered time-based Yet when you do a film, you think of how you can exist outside film proper. And when you make an image, you think of like, how can you intervene with the audience so they start with that image but end in their own life and carry that image with them. And if you apply this to so many of my works, and it becomes an intervention. The best example of this is the project that I did for Venice, the Letter to a Refusing Pilot, which is a film, but also it's a stage for an Israeli pilot to walk into the Lebanon pavilion in Venice one day and sit. And that's happened in October. So it's really like, for me, it's an important, films are not only made to be consumed as time-based media. I'd like to be able to go beyond that into theater.
But which also means that then in terms of the piece of Venice, whereas very often photography and a type of film is associated with a certain sense of nostalgia, of longing for the past, you also...
You're talking about the Venice piece?
No, in general, that very often there is this perception that as a media they are associated with a sensation of nostalgia. That you also build in a possibility of future into the work by making room for something which may happen one day.
I mean, but the trick with working with documents, for me, is to avoid two things: being niched or tagged as someone who works on the heritage. And the idea of heritage is like, I dislike and I try to avoid, because it's true that whatever it is maybe called by one entity as heritage. No many state powers like to have to carry on heritage and promote itself through heritage by using itself in the past. What I do is learn from the past in a different way, and I try to avoid nostalgia as much as I can, and I like to use it as objects that are born in the past, that I use exactly like I use fossils in larger works. So my work is a construction on documents as opposed to taking documents and enchant something that is gone through them. It's like taking a tiny old building and construct on top of it a highly slick and modern building that incorporates it, digests it, and injects life in it. Love, desire, love. Why is love twice?
That was very important because I thought there's a lot of conversation around desire and the way desire is connected to the act of looking and the way that connects to the experience of cinema and film. What I found also very striking that in a lot of your work which deals with desire, it seems to be embedded in a notion of love. And I think it can take many different forms. So I was also very struck, for instance, when I saw the current exhibition, that there's a sense of love for Madani, for the photographer whose work you essentially look after. So it's a much bigger understanding.
Mm-hmm. Well, I believe that you cannot, I do not carry on making work about things that I dislike. So from the moment I'm attached to something, I try to work on it. I cannot spend my time with people I dislike, for example, and just even if they are subjects of my work. This is why it's very important for me to meet my subjects and be reasserted if I should continue working on that. I mean, I've started so many projects and I decided that I'm not continuing anymore because I didn't enjoy being with the people who I designated as subjects. So I have to, but of course love is much larger too, because love is what we miss and what we seek in life and what we care to preserve the most, life and love. And I think people's interest in preservation start with love and life. Mummies, on a personal level, you just want to extend your love the most. Desire is, apart from desiring humans, desire is something that inhabits an artist, because I think as a filmmaker or as an artist or sometimes as an architect as well, you build what you desire to, where you desire to live. And because animals leave a trace as much, and I think when you say I'm driven by desire, it means I want to leave a trace. Animals do leave a trace, but I don't know if they leave it consciously. It's a very enigmatic question that I always ask myself. Now, below all of this is like the love that humans really love to be in, and sometimes they fail and sometimes they succeed. It's the small love, but we love that love too. And we love talking about it. Oh, public and private.
I mean, again, it's interesting because I think, again, always trying to relate these questions back to what we can actually see. Now this morning in London, I thought that one of the things which is very curious when you look at the work of Madani, of this photographer, this archive you work with, and the stories that are contained within it and what it tells you about the many people's understanding of public and private. So they create a public-private self, and they have themselves photographed at times in certain ways, but they will determine who they want to share that image with. You make a decision that you make this much more public. At the same time, I think there are aspects of you as a person, private aspects that you have made public through your work. So it sort of swings both ways around, this pendulum between public and private.
I think it starts with the idea of accessing information, whether it's an image or not. I'm sure there's a line between public and private, and many things are considered totally okay if they remain in the private realm, and once they become public, they become controversial. So there is this aspect of this border, private to public, but also there's another aspect of like where things become exhibitionism as much as you do things at home. So in my work, there's this border between public and private. Once I did, for example, in 1999, a work by the seaside on the Corniche in Beirut that was actually removed for 4 days later because it showed people watching TV, and one of them could have been watching pornography, and that was totally okay to exist, but not on the street. And there is, I think, we live in hidden geographies, borders that are not very visible, and it's only once you put this agent that makes things visible, only you realize that there are actually borders. It's a complex, I think, network of things. Like on YouTube, people film themselves and put themselves in the public, although they come from a very personal and intimate space, and they broadcast their images to the public intentionally.
In what way does it differ for you when you take something which is your private self and you make it public, to when you take the work, let's say the image of somebody else, and make that public, which you do through those people? They may not have had those images made.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, in your question, there's this, you're hinting as if like, I'm free to put my personal life into the public, but maybe I should be constrained by people with other people's images. And I think other people's images are like a huge scale of possibilities and intentions. Some people did images because they wanted to promote themselves, and by putting their images in the public and like making them more public, maybe you are helping them reach where they should, where they could not reach. And sometimes you are betraying them slightly. So that there is working with an archive, particularly like Achim Borchardt-Hume, so it's made with big people. It's inevitable that you would be sometimes betraying the humans or the individuals that are in the archive. And I guess the project has to live with it, because it cannot be done without it. Beauty.
expected ways. But you pay an enormous amount of attention to create something beautiful. So again, when one looks at your work at the moment, those objects are beautifully made. There's a lot of attention to detail, the way it's choreographed. So clearly the aesthetics of form and to come to this overriding effective quality of beauty is very important and considered. And I think equally you've done other works where you've played again with that notion in relationship to love and desire, and what is it that makes us perceive as somebody as beautiful, or to see somebody whom you may perceive as beautiful, but somebody else may not. So beauty seems to be a theme, a quality.
Frankly, I connect this, if we were like doing tagging, I would tag this with desire and with ambiguity as well. Because beauty alone, I'm not into the golden formula of beauty. I think beauty is related to a certain understanding of a situation, so you would see it beautiful. Very, very often, sometimes you like could be an artwork, but also a piece of furniture, a carpet, and then a few years later you decide that you don't like it anymore. You don't find it as much as you used to find it beautiful. So beauty sometimes is temporary, and it depends on your states. I would tend to connect it to desire, which is something slightly ephemeral, and I would connect it also with ambiguity, because I think the more you keep things ambiguous, the more that you can protect the beauty in them. Beirut.
Well, of course I have to answer that. The first time we met was in Beirut. I went the first time to Beirut with all the expectations of the art tourist. It just seemed to be such a glamorous destination, conflict-ridden, war-torn, great food, beautiful weather, sea. It had all those ingredients. Then it was quite curious when we talked that a great many of the artists you get very often mentioned in that context, actually a lot of them aren't, well, I mean, they're rooted in Beirut, but they may go in and out, they may live in other places. What was very striking when we talked, you seem to be very homebound, very clearly of the place and be living with the place and in the place in a very day-to-day way. So Beirut as a place both of actuality and the imagination, how does this relate to your work?
My relationship to Beirut is a relationship of home. I feel at home in the sense that I possess most of the keys to the understanding of how to live there and how to survive there. But also because my work is based there and it's about there, I don't think, I mean, it was a conscious decision to live in Beirut continuously and not to leave it and come back to it whenever I needed to work. So otherwise it becomes like a working place. For me, Beirut is not my working place. It's my living place. I will try to stay there as much as life and the situation allows me to. It's a very difficult place, even to work. So there's nothing, I mean, I don't like to glorify it more than what it is, or mystify it more than it is. It's just like any other city where I find comfort and where my work is, so I don't want to live outside my work and come and visit my work occasionally.
So there are three words on the card. Almost the same, but slight distinction: photography, photograph, and photographer. And your work relates to all three. They of course all three relate to one another, but they are not synonymous, and nor do they necessarily describe the same thing. So if you think about the relationship between photography as a medium and as a concept, the photograph as a physical object, and the notion of the photographer as the one taking the image. How does that play out in your work?
A few years ago, I started this idea. I wanted to make a journal called Against Photography, and finally, it didn't work. And I think I like the idea of positioning yourself against photography when you work with photographs, because the world of photography is similar to the world of documentary film, for example. It's governed by so many things that have nothing to do with photography itself or with documentary film itself. It has to do with long-lasting institutions, long-lasting traditions, culture of preservation. And all of these make sometimes environments that are too restrictive, too restricting for an artist, or for an artist to be liberated. So there are a lot of ill feelings between me and photography, but I think photographs are one of the greatest inventions of the 20th century. It's like photograph as an object can be as beautiful as the most beautiful person you ever wanted to live with. You can live with a photograph until you die. And yeah, it's really great, but this has nothing to do with the world of photography, because the world of photography is made with museums, conservators, collectors, dealers, and very often it's for their interest to glorify the picture as an object, to worship it as an object, to care for it as an object, sometimes forgetting what's in it. And yeah, I like to shift my interest elsewhere. This is why On Photography, People and Modern Times is a two-screen film. It's totally about photography, but it's not a photograph. There is this cult of the original and the vintage in photography that is completely outside my interest, frankly. So photography is this strangely defined culture. It's just happened that institutions and powerful institutions take over, and powerful traditions take over it. A photograph is this beautiful object that you like sometimes to destroy as much as you like to put on a wall. Because if you look very much in family albums, you see a lot of destroyed pictures, and it's amazing because they become records of violence at home. You dislike your aunt, you just pierce the eyes of your aunt in a picture, and I've seen this a lot. People are so creative in dealing with their family pictures. Like, I've met this beautiful example of this woman who took out from her album all the pictures of her friends who got married and then got divorced. So she made an album of wedding pictures of those who were divorced. So you allow yourself to, it's a very playful object, a photograph, and it's not necessarily to be a little bit too much glorified. Photographer is, there's huge scale of photographers. Some photographers are a machine of producing pictures, and it's great. They are part of this 20th century huge mechanism of producing pictures. In the archive of Hashim al-Madi, sometimes I'm able to tell that this picture was taken by the photographer, sometimes it could be taken by someone else, and his assistant when he's not there. So photographer is not necessarily the one who clicked the button. And it varies a lot. The situation varies a lot. There are photographers, auteurs, there are photographers who created a system and let the system work. They become like entrepreneurs. And there are photographers who just design a situation, like a filmmaker would design a situation, hire someone to bring equipment, hire someone to do the lighting, and then orchestrate this entire. They are also photographers, although they did not press the button. So the issue is, I would tend to be interested in image makers more than photographers.
Is that how you would define the difference between you as an artist making images and the photographer plainly labeled as a photographer? Because there's always this curious thing on this medium that there is this sliding scale between famously the artist working with photography and the photographer, and it's like sort of Protestants and Catholics, and then there is the whole notion of you making different types of, taking different types of images, but clearly working in appreciation of the work of another photographer, but who as such is not necessarily then outstanding as a practitioner.
Yeah, if you're talking about my work on existing photography, particularly Achim Borchardt-Hume, I like the works to live with this duality of dates, duality of authors, but I like to push it even further, because when I show a framed picture of Achim Borchardt-Hume, I'm saying this is a work by Akram Zaatari, because this is a result of an excavation that took 10 years, and here I'm showing you only a sample of it. At the same time, this portrait is a picture taken by a photographer from Saida, whose biography is so-and-so, who worked from that year and this year. He took this image in 1953. I made out of it an art project, or a project that circulates in the art world, dated 2006 or 2007. So all these elements are pictured exactly like buildings from the 12th century, on which you construct a higher building from 2011 by an architect, whatever. It's like I live in a different economy than his, and I live a different desire than his. And I'm able to start my work the moment he stopped working. So I'm able to comment about his life, his practice, his economy, his choices, and that's my interest, coming from a documentary perspective. This is what I'm interested in. And again, back to the contradiction. Might seem a contradiction for someone, but for me it is not a contradiction. It complicates the life of institutions. I think it complicates the lives of conservators, of people who are indexing works in an archive, in a database. It does. But who says that life is simple? And who says that production and art production and creativity can be simply reduced to like a database? So sometimes I do complicate the life of others. Memory. I dislike the term memory because it has some kind of nostalgic, but if you think of it outside nostalgia, memory is a record. And I do work with records, and I do intend to leave work for future records. So if the word is deprived from that nostalgia, I think I'm very happy with it.
But I think it's also curious that you mobilize memory, which is actually not real memory, because people don't necessarily have it. There's a memory you play with, which suggests to me that I remember something from the past, which actually I couldn't possibly have known, or it's a play by association on memories which I may have in different ways. So you do mobilize it as a force in the imagination, quite consciously.
Yeah, you're talking about alternative history, or writing, which I'm really interested in writing. I think my work is about theater as much as it's about writing. It's like photography, film are always media, like pencil, fountain pen, etc. This is why I'm also against photography in such a way, because it's only a tool towards something. I think I'm a historian, I'm a writer, I'm a theater person. So yes, bringing up the story of the pilot who refused, the Israeli pilot who refused to bomb a school in South Lebanon in 1982 is a memory, but it's, for me today, it's about writing history. So, yeah, and it's like without this nostalgia, without this. What I like also about memory is, like, if you look at the picture of the woman whose portrait was scratched by the jealous husband that is hanging in the show here, I like also the memory of the negative. The negative is able to tell us what happened. It reenacts this gesture of scratching the emulsion out of the negative to make this picture useless in the future. And in fact, that's what makes it useful for us to understand. So that, we go back to the photographer. Okay, the photographer took the portrait of Mrs. Bakari, but this is absolutely, it's a portrait among millions. And then the husband comes and asks for damaging or destroying that image, and then they made it actually valuable. So who's author of this document? I don't know. It's a mixture. It's like, or like the bodybuilders. They are there because they're eroding young bodies, like eroding emulsion, recorded one day, beautiful masculine bodies. And my interest in writing is in writing with the eroded emulsion as opposed to writing with bodybuilders beautifully depicted on screen, on negatives. Value. We can keep this till the end, maybe.
Value is a curious one because there is a material value enshrined in the whole thing, in terms of how those photographs start their life and the status they have achieved now. But there's also the notion of use value, what you just touched on. They were valuable for different reasons in different moments of their existence.
Let's call it speculative value, speculative non-material value, let's call it plastic value. Sometimes, especially with documents, you are interested in something, but your knowledge of the document needs maturity. So there is a value in the document, but it's slightly undefined. You know that one day you will be able to construct something meaningful with this document. And yeah, I like that. This is like kind of ambiguity as well, that a relationship of ambiguity with the document. You know you will need it one day, but you're not able yet to comment with it or to say something meaningful with it. So it's a value that is delayed to the future. And other values are, of course, capital values. And one of the things that I'm struggling with is the value of the archive, is the material value of the archive, especially, and that's also one of the ongoing discussions in the Arab Image Foundation. How much are we aware that the archive that is in our custody has reached a value that wasn't there in the 90s, and how this could change the nature of the organization? How could this change how we are seen in the region, also in a region that is almost fighting to possess archives, with all that's happening in the Gulf and the new museums happening there, with the need of buying and accumulating archives because they are like capital value. So yeah, and this is why I wanted to run away from, this is why once I proposed to the Arab Image Foundation to start returning physical collections back to their owners and just keep an electronic record. I did not want to become like the guardian of a materially precious collection. Anyway, this is a long, but that's to say that apart from the speculative plastic value, there is a material value that changes also, like like gold, like silver, like
At which point I will slightly manipulate this, because this was actually one of them, which was the archive and the Arab Image Foundation. Because the Arab Image Foundation is entering a different stage in its life cycle. I think it was very, there was a moment where it was very conflated actually with the work of several artists, of course particularly yours, but there were others, where it entered the wider world. People didn't actually quite understand what it really is. So I think I would like to ask you to say something briefly, both about the moment of birth and about the moment where it is now and what you perceive maybe the future for the Arab Image Foundation.
The moment of birth was very much accidental, but that's all moments of birth are accidental, I think. it was accidental. We wanted to naively be able to look at and show others photography from the Arab region, Middle East and North Africa. And I realized a few years later that what we've done is something else. What we've done are like constellations of pictures that were there because of the interests of whoever brought it to the foundation, and because most of us were artists, and I particularly was working with my collections in art-related projects, I established a strong direction that was not unique in the world, that happened parallel to so many other interests by artists in archives and in collecting. So I established like a foundation that was in between a collection and a collection that's open to the public, and at the same time a collection with material that is there with a speculative plastic value. So in other terms, material that was there for the day, until the day we could do projects, art projects with it. And it was we were all insisting that this is a contemporary way of looking at past documents as opposed to a repository of things from the past only. And the foundation grew with those two wings, a strong existence in the contemporary art world that was driving and leading the foundation, and another strong arm or wing promoting the culture of preservation. And I think both are equally important. Now, with all that's happened around, well, in my own practice, in what we just talked about, my ill feelings with capital and with the world of photography, with the cult of the photograph, and with disagreements within the foundation. So I think the foundation is more today heading towards leading a role that is so much needed in preservation. If, whether or not the other arm will grow equally in the future, I don't know, really, I don't know. I mean, the foundation is an autonomous institution. I led it as a president of board for more than 10 years, and then I stepped down somewhere in 2010. It's autonomous. It has a board, it has an elected board, it has people who work in it, it has a director who leads also the planning of how the foundation is going to run, and this is one of the unique organizations that is led in such a way in Beirut, by the way, that is not dominated by one figure almost by force. And I think it's very healthy that the foundation stays as it is until one day there's a movement in it that takes place. But now it's really doing, I think the foundation is doing an exceptional role in training conservators from the region, in seeking to promote the culture of preservation, really telling people how they should store their pictures and institutions.
Let's do one more, and then we open it to the floor.
One of these two? Maybe we can look at both and decide. History. Oh, we've talking about history. Politics. That's good. Yeah. Frankly, I love politics, and I really follow all the time. And I think working with history is inevitably political, especially if you don't want to conform to history in a big age, conform to the constraints in where you live, to your religious beliefs, to whatever. It's if you want to be liberated from all of this, you are inevitably doing politics. And politics not only, I'm interested in expanding in so many directions and trying to explore issues related to sex, gender conflicts, also not to provoke, but to leave a record that is just a little bit about where we live and how we carry out our lives. It just happens that the record is in
colleagues who would like to ask any questions of that. Jeremy.
Jeremy Lewison. It seems to me that one of the sub-themes of your work is intimacy. We've talked about love, but it's a slightly different concept. You're very intimate, if I could put it this way, with al-Madani's archive. You've made films of two men undressing each other or having arguments, so to speak, in doing that. And many of the studio photographs of al-Madani are, in effect, intimate portraits. Now, the first time I came across the scratched out negatives, they were on a relatively small scale, and now you've made them large scale. So I'm wondering whether you could comment on the relationship between intimacy and scale in your work.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking. Yeah, these are two levels. In this exhibition, for example, there are two vitrines that show you images at 100% scale. That brings your perception of the photography of Achim Madani to scale, to the scale with which those pictures circulated. And it's true, I've decided to enlarge beyond this scale the two pictures of the scratched lady, because I think their meaning goes beyond family, beyond the original context for which they were produced. And today, being able to comment on them at that scale, or to see them at that scale, is important, because if you produce them that small, you will not see how violent is the pin on the emulsion. And I've decided to do this equally with the bodybuilders. So there are two series now in my head. It's called Photographic Phenomena. Phenomena that escaped the photographer. Things that happened to his collection that he was not behind and he did not decide to, but phenomena around him or situations around him that's made of his pictures what they are today. And for this series I decided to blow them up, and until now I've done this only for the bodybuilders and the damaged pictures. Now, actually, like we're talking market-wise, we've decided with the Arabian Foundation from the times when we did studio practices to keep that a possibility. In the sense, when we did our certificates for the original collection, for the studio practices collection, it was stated on the certificate that we reserve the right to produce larger, in the future, larger images. And I think it was important to state it, speculating on the possibility of using them in other types of artwork.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
The impact of blowing up the scratch negatives makes it into a completely different work for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's lost that intimacy, and it's become a much more public statement. I don't know, it's just so different.
I mean, I totally agree with you, but I also, like, very sincerely, I live with those desires that can be seen as contradicting desires. The End of Time, the film that you mentioned, exists in two different ways. Once as a 4:3 black and white, silent, 16mm film that is projected in Documenta. And it has another existence as a color plus sound, different format, 16:9, that can be watched on a screen that's 6 meters wide. And this is how I showed it recently in my exhibitions. And I think with each one you gain something. Maybe you highlight the idea of intimacy in one of them, but you highlight other aspects in the other. And it's true, maybe the large portrait of Mrs. Bakari loses intimacy, but it gains, I think it gains something else. Or I have to live with it and learn from what it would radiate around it when put next to other works.
Just to get more on what you were talking about, you hovered over image making or image makers. And I'm trying to sort of dig it out of this sort of centre part of the conversation that you were having. But could you talk a little about the sort of state of the image now? And are you referring to image making as something that's away from the object of the photograph? I mean, we deal so much in files.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, when you consider images as images and not restrict yourself to see them as photographic objects, although a photograph is clearly an image plus a photographic object. I think images are, it's just like it enlarges the scope with which you look at what's facing you. I very often comment about today, people who used to go to Madani, for example, to be photographed in a studio. Today, they film themselves with their telephones and put their images on YouTube. A bodybuilder who came once to the photographer to take 4 pictures doing that position, today he just like does a whole session of bodybuilding, records himself. That's what I've shown in this installation called Dance to the End of Love. So what's equivalent today in what Madani did, or what the attitudes that people were seeking while going to the photographer, today they don't need a photographer, they do them at home and they broadcast them. So I tend to say we've become more broadcasters as opposed to photographers. So we are more in broadcasting the moment as opposed to seizing the moment, capturing the moment. And by saying these are image makers, you give them, I think, justice, and you escape being brought into a technical denomination that is a photograph, and that makes it automatically fall in a register of like how to be preserved, or what it is, how does it circulate, etc., etc. I think you would just keep it more ambiguous by saying it's an image. It can be a text as an image as well.
Can I just ask you one last question? Drawing on the experiences of documents of the project at MoMA in New York and also the exhibition now, if you had to single out one overriding concern of yours at the moment, which informs your work, really the question is to you what you feel you are most thinking about. Can you say that, what that is?
I think in my work there's always been the very, again, intimate, the very personal thought facing the course of history. The very personal, I mean, there are derivatives of this, like civil life versus military life, where like the borders of states, the borders of nations, it's all of this that interests me in the writing of history, the archaeology, digging past documents, digging out past documents and looking at people's lives being